My sister hid Grandma's real will, so I filed it in court and became executor. The morning after the funeral, the sea mist was still clinging to the hedges along Harbor Lane when I unlocked Grandma Eleanor's front door and stepped into the blue and cream hallway I'd known since I was 6. The house was a shingled Victorian on the Massachusetts coast, all gables and dormers and a wraparound porch that faced the harbor like a watchful old friend. The radiators ticked as they warmed. A kettle clicked on in the kitchen because the timer she set every night was still obeying a clock she no longer needed. And the air smelled faintly of lemon oil and lilies left over from the wake. I stood there, with the keys heavy in my pocket, and the weight of my surname heavier on my chest. My name is Rowan Vale. My sister is Celeste. The two of us had learned early that in New England families, loyalty is a verb. You do it, you don't say it. And secrets are an inheritance as real as stamped silver or a house on a hill. Still, I'd always believed our grandmother had been the antidote to every unsaid thing. She labeled her spice jars, she wrote notes in the margins of her cookbooks, she sent birthday cards a week early, and every December she gave us a folder labeled Financials that listed her utilities and where to find the tax folder and who to call if the boiler coughed. So when Celeste told me, 10 minutes after we'd collected the last casserole dish and folded the last sympathy card, that there was no will, the words struck me like cold water to the face. No will? I repeated because saying something again is sometimes the first step towards rejecting it. I set my bag on the sideboard where Grandma used to line up her postcards and grocery lists. I told her in June she'd updated everything. Celeste shrugged a practiced theatrical lift of shoulders beneath an expensive black coat. She had flown in from London 2 days before the funeral with a rolling suitcase the color of car paint and a grief as immaculate as her manicure. "People say things," she said. "You know how she was at the end. Names got sticky in her mouth." "She didn't mix up names," I said too quickly. The defense came out as if I'd been practicing it in the car. She had a moment when she called me Mama, and she laughed at herself and said, names travel in families like heirlooms, but she didn't forget. Her mouth squeezed into something that could have been sympathy if you didn't know her. There's a deed to the house. There's her checking and that little investment account you helped her set up. She nodded toward the sideboard, toward the drawer where Grandma kept the financials folder. No will. We looked. We? I asked. I hadn't been able to get home from Boston until the morning of the wake. You went through the house without me? Her eyes slipped past me to the front parlor, to the bay window where flowers and crystal vases still glowed pale. It had to be done. The funeral home wanted information. The bank will need to know. Someone had to be the adult. I let the adult comment pass because grief makes manners into a fragile thing. And because the truth was, Celeste had always been actress perfect at sounding decisive in rooms full of cousin whispers. And because my hands had begun to tremble, and I didn't want to give her the satisfaction of seeing it. I walked down the hall, my boots quiet on the runner. The kitchen light was on, just as the kettle click had promised. On the table was a stack of sympathy cards and a loan shopping list in Grandma's loopy hand. Rye bread, oranges, tea.
"We can check again," I said, "together." Celeste sighed the sigh of someone who had already done a job and wanted recognition for it. "If it makes you feel better." She looked at her phone as if there were anywhere else she needed to be. We started in the study. It was a small, square room off the kitchen where the light fell warm in the mornings and the harbor wind rattled the window latches when storms rolled in. Bookshelves lined 2 walls, a desk sat under a painting of the lighthouse, and on the desk sat the tin of paper clips that had been there since my childhood. The desk drawers smelled like cedar and old paper. We emptied each one into neat piles on the rug. Stamps, envelopes, tax folders, a stack of clipped recipes. I found a receipt for a locksmith from 5 months ago and a note in Grandma's hand. Ask Rowan about new fireproof pouch. I felt the prickle that's the body's way of raising a flag. Fireproof pouch, I murmured. Celeste didn't look up. She probably meant for documents. You know how houses with history make people nervous? She told me hurricane season kept her awake last year. I slid the lock receipt and the note aside, made a mental pin of them. We looked through the books on the first shelf, because you learn things in old houses. Wills hide in cookbooks, in encyclopedias, inside atlases cut hollow, under the felt of keepsake boxes, and once in my neighbor's case, in the freezer behind a bag of peas, because someone read that fire doesn't melt ice. When I lifted the worn cookbook with the sugar-stained edges, a small index card fluttered to the floor. It said, in Grandma's hand, Rowan, blue vase equals blue paper. Blue vase, I said. My eyes went to the mantel in the parlor. A tall, cobalt amphora we dusted 100 times. Celeste's phone chimed. She glanced at the screen, then pushed to standing. The real estate agent is coming at 3. She thinks if the house is clean, we can do photos next week. The house? My voice came out flat. We haven't even... Celeste, we can't decide anything until we know what she wanted. She wanted us to be practical. She said it every time the boiler clanged. Practical means not letting a house sit empty through winter. Heat costs money. I closed my eyes against the quick flash of anger that made the room sharpen. Practical means following her wishes. I looked down at the card. The loop of her R had whimsy in it. The last time I stood at her stove, she tapped my hand with a wooden spoon and said, "Laws are the stories we write when we can't be in the room, little bird. Put your story where it will stand up against storms." I walked to the parlor while Celeste called someone and used a voice like a newscaster's. The blue vase stood where it had always stood. It was heavier than it looked, the glaze crazed from age, the base covered in a circle of felt. I tipped it and reached in, but all my fingers found was cool emptiness and the soft scratch of tissue. I pulled out a wad of white. Nothing. I checked again, and my knuckles knocked against ceramic. "Rowan?" Celeste was in the doorway to the parlor, coat on again, phone in hand. "If you want to obsess over a ceramic thing, be my guest. I've got to go meet someone about the utilities." "Who?" I asked, but she was already halfway down the hall. The door clicked. The house exhaled into quiet. I set the vase on the rug and peeled the felt back. Underneath were 3 tiny screws I could worry loose with the edge of a butter knife. A ring of the base twisted away, and there, nestled in the hollow space like a secret cell, was a strip of blue paper wound tight. My hands shook. I unrolled it slowly. Inside was a key, small, with teeth like a smile, and a thin note on blue stationery. It read, "Love you, look left of the lighthouse." Her E looped, her O's small. I looked up at the painting. The lighthouse in the painting had a shelf beneath it with a row of books. Left of the lighthouse, on the shelf, was the old New England atlas that weighed as much as a small dog. I pulled it down and felt the drag of something heavier than paper at its center. The middle had been cut into a neat rectangle. Inside laid a fireproof pouch the size of a paperback and a velvet pouch that clinked. My breath climbed high in my chest. I zipped open the fireproof sleeve. Inside was an envelope sealed in the wax she saved for Christmas cards. Eleanor A. Breyer, written in her steady hand. Underneath that, in smaller script, "Last will and testament," dated 6 months ago. There were signature tabs, the green triangles a law office uses to show where to sign. The second pouch held 2 rings I had never seen and a typewritten copy of a letter. The rings were her mother's wedding band and a small sapphire set in white gold. The letter said, "To Rowan," and began, If you're reading this, it means I got there first. I sat down on the rug and I read the letter through once and then again aloud, because reading aloud makes words real. She had named me personal representative, executor, in the word everyone uses. And she had left the house to Celeste and me equally, with instructions to endow a small scholarship at the community college in Grandpa's name from the savings bonds she hoarded in the cedar chest. She had written, in that careful voice of hers, that capacity and witnesses were two of the three legs of a stool, and she had insisted on both and on a notary at the church office. The names of the witnesses stood clear. The last paragraph said she was sure Celeste would understand that love and fairness were not identical twins, and that sometimes loving two people meant refusing to give either what they believed they deserved. A floorboard creaked. I looked up. Celeste was in the parlor doorway, her coat unbuttoned now, her cheeks bright with cold. "Forgot your scarf," I began, and then saw the look on her face. Not grief, not surprise, something like recognition, and then a flash of panic. She stepped in and shut the door behind her carefully, as if the house might be listening. Her voice came out low and fast. "Rowan, don't touch that. It's Grandma's will. Her last will. She left instructions. Celeste crossed the room in 3 strides and reached toward the pouch. I pulled it close, and her fingers closed on my wrist. For a small woman, she always had the kind of strength that comes from Pilates and years of gripping opportunities. "Listen to me," she said. "We can handle this quietly." Quietly? I felt the laugh that wasn't funny come up. She died, Sel. Quiet was never the plan. Celeste's jaw went tight. For a second, the sister I remembered, the one who used to plait my hair by the window in the guest room on summer nights and tell me the names of clouds, looked back. Then the look hardened. She let go of my wrist. "You don't understand," she said. "I found that the day she signed it. She put it in that ridiculous vase like an amateur in a crime show. I took it out and hid it somewhere safe so you wouldn't go on some hero crusade that would make everything harder."
You hid it? You lied to me. The words landed in the room like dropped plates. I protected us. She moved her hand as if smoothing air. There are taxes. There's the house. There's the market. There's the fact that you have a job in Boston and I live in London, and this place will become a fight if we let it. And there's the scholarship nonsense. She wanted to be remembered by strangers. We're not a foundation. She wanted to be herself, I said. My hand had already moved, my phone already up and clicking. I photographed the will, the seals, the date. I photographed the letter with my name. I emailed the pictures to myself, to my manager, to an account with a ridiculous name I'd made for spam a decade ago and never used. The house hummed. The radiator sighed. The harbor wind pushed against the glass. We don't get to edit her after she's gone. Celeste laughed, short and incredulous, as if I'd said something sentimental in a courtroom. You think a piece of paper is a person? I think agreements are the bones of a family, I said. I stood, the pouch against my chest. I'm taking this to an attorney. You can't. Her hand grabbed for the pouch, and by reflex I pulled away. The zipper snagged on the velvet bag, and for a hot second the sound of a tearing seam was the only sound in the room. We both froze. The pouch held. The ring bag dangled. Celeste's grip loosened, she stepped back, breathing hard, and then dropped her hands. You always wanted her to choose you, even now. That one landed where it was meant to. I turned away because I didn't want her to see me flinch. I want her to speak for herself. The next morning, frost silvered the grass on Harbor Lane, and the probate attorney's office in Salem smelled like paper and coffee. Attorney Bennett had a calm face and a tie with small sailboats that felt like a joke understood among locals. He read Grandma's will without commentary, only nodding at the dates,
tapping a pen against the witness lines once, twice. He asked about the notary, and I told him it was the church secretary, Mrs. Carstairs, who had a stamp and a sense of humor that could cut glass. He made a copy of the death certificate and gathered the documents into a neat stack. He said, "This is, as these things go, clean. The court still has to accept it, but you've done the crucial thing, which is bring me the original. You'd be surprised how many people show up with photocopies and a conviction." He looked up, eyes mildly amused. "You will need to give formal notice to your sister and to any other heirs, cousins, uncles, anyone who would inherit under intestacy. Just Celeste and me. Our parents died a long time ago." He nodded. "Then we'll file a petition for probate and appointment of personal representative with the Essex Probate and Family Court. The clerk will check it in. A magistrate will review it. If your sister doesn't object, we may be able to do this informally. If she does, we'll schedule a hearing." "She'll object." I thought of Celeste in the parlor, with the rings clinking against one another like teeth. "She thinks I want to be chosen." "And do you?" he asked, not unkindly. "I want the truth to stay standing when the wind picks up. I want what she wrote to be what happens." He smiled as if that answer belonged on a chalkboard. "Then we'll give the court what it needs. Evidence and a clean chain of custody and names spelled right." He slid a set of forms to me. "Sign here, here, and here. The court likes blue ink. It makes originals look like they're breathing." I signed, my name a steadier thing than the pulse in my wrist. We drove to the courthouse after lunch, the sky a pale winter blue, and the courthouse a red bricked building with doors that made everyone straighten their coats. The security guard had kind eyes. In the hallway, a bulletin board showed flyers for mediation clinics and a picture of a judge smiling with a classroom of kids who looked like raisins in their puffy coats. The clerk's window sat under a sign that said "Filings" in spiky letters. A woman behind the glass looked up. "Good afternoon," she said. Her nameplate read Newman. She wore glasses on a chain and a sweater knit in an intricate pattern that reminded me of Grandma's afghans. "What can we do for you?" "Filing a petition to probate a will," Attorney Bennett said. He slid the stack of papers under the glass. "Original will enclosed, death certificate, bond, acceptance by the personal representative." He nodded toward me. "Ms. Whale." The clerk glanced through the stack with the efficiency of someone whose hands could sort paper in her sleep. She took a blue ink stamp, pressed it to an ink pad, and was halfway to stamping the first page, "Received," when the glass door behind us hissed open and a gust of cold air followed the sound of heels. "Excuse me," a voice said, a familiar voice, too bright and steady to belong to anyone who had cried last night. Celeste's voice. "We need to file an objection to that petition and a competing application. There's a later document." A man in a charcoal suit stepped beside her and placed a slim folder on the counter with the confidence of someone who had put slim folders on counters for a living. He looked at me as if I were a client gone rogue. "We're counsel for Miss Celeste Vale. We'll be seeking a formal proceeding. There's serious question as to capacity and another instrument dated more recently than the one they're submitting." The clerk's stamp hovered over my papers, while the ink glistened on its rubber face. My mouth went dry in a way that had nothing to do with winter air. I turned toward my sister. She didn't look away. Her chin tilted a fraction, the old childhood tell that meant she had decided, and nothing I loved about her would change the decision. "What instrument?" I asked. My voice sounded smaller than I liked, but it didn't shake. "What are you talking about, Celeste?" She opened her bag and withdrew a pale envelope in a plastic sleeve, the kind archivists use. Even from a foot away, I could see the writing on it. Eleanor A. Breyer, Last Will and Testament. The date in the corner was a month after the will in my hands.
My vision narrowed until all that remained was the neat tilt of that date like a blade. Grandma left a codicil, Celeste said. We can do this the hard way if we have to, but I'd rather we didn't. The courthouse hummed around us. Voices, footsteps, a printer somewhere chewing paper. My heart lifted and fell in one long motion, like a wave thinning over stones. Attorney Bennett drew breath beside me. The clerk set the stamp down, the ink face up, careful not to smudge anything before the story of this room was decided. Celeste's lawyer tapped the glass. "Shall we schedule a hearing?" he asked, cheerfully, as if suggesting brunch. The envelope in her hand shone like something stolen. I felt the weight of my grandmother's fireproof pouch against my chest, and the weight of all the times she taught me to say exactly what I meant. I opened my mouth. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're from. If this story moves you, please subscribe. Tomorrow I have a special story for you.
Miss Newman, I said, the air in my throat brittle as ice, please stamp our petition received. The clerk's eyes flicked to me, then to the pale envelope in Celeste's hand. The stamp hovered, ink gleaming. I'm going to take both filings, she said evenly. I'll mark them received and give you each a copy of the docket number. If there's a competing instrument, a will or codicil with a later date, the magistrate will likely convert this to a formal proceeding. If that happens, you'll both be notified of a hearing date. Celeste's lawyer gave an agreeable little nod, like this was the brunch reservation he'd hoped for. That's perfectly fine. He slid his folder through the slot under the glass, original document enclosed. Attorney Bennett's jaw flexed, but his voice stayed calm. We need a clerk's receipt for the original will and for any later instrument, he said. Chain of custody matters. Of course, Miss Newman replied. The blue stamp came down on my petition, the word received blooming like a bruise on paper. She stamped the envelope list, the death certificate, the bond, then reached for Celeste's sleeve. The second stamp sounded the same, flat, official, irrevocable. I breathed. Not easily, but enough. Celeste didn't look at me. She looked at the stamp as if it were a verdict, and then at her lawyer as if he were a lifeguard with a whistle. The new envelope, the one claiming to be later than Grandma's will, lay on the counter wrapped in its clear sleeve, and even through plastic I could see the date in the corner, neat and terrible. The clerk slid a white slip under the glass toward me. Docket number, she said. This is your case in the system. Keep it. She gave one to Celeste, too. If this is moved to a formal petition, the court will set it down for hearing. We'll mail notices to the addresses on file. When? I asked. She glanced at her screen. We're about 4 weeks out for contested matters. It depends on the magistrate's calendar. 4 weeks. An ocean of nights. Thank you, I said, because my grandmother had taught me to put gratitude where frustration wanted to be. We stepped back from the counter. A man with a stack of custody forms moved forward, and 2 women with a basket of homemade cookies for the clerk waited behind him. The courthouse smelled like coffee and floor polish and winter wool. In the hallway, Celeste's heels clicked a bright metronome against the linoleum. She waited until we were past the bulletin board with the smiling judge and the mediation clinic flyers before she spoke. It doesn't have to be war, she said softly. Then why did you bring a sword? I asked. My voice was even. I was proud of that. She gave a small, theatrical sigh. Because you're always so good at winning the moral argument, Ro. I came prepared for the practical one. She tilted her head toward the doors. Can we talk like adults somewhere that isn't echoing? Attorney Bennett's eyebrows arched slightly at me, a silent question. I nodded. 10 minutes, I said to Celeste on the steps. Outside, the air had the bright bite of January. We stood on the courthouse steps like 2 women on a postcard who'd never been girls in the same twin bed because the heat had gone out that winter when Dad was between jobs.
Attorney Bennett moved a few paces away, just enough to give us privacy and just enough to be there if the conversation turned into the kind that needed witnesses. Celeste pulled her coat tighter and watched a bus ease by. She didn't look at me when she spoke. "The codicil is legitimate," she said without preamble. "She signed it at home. She was with it completely. She wanted me to administer the estate. There were things she thought you couldn't handle because of your job. You live 2 hours away. I flew across an ocean when she needed me." "You hid the first will," I said. "That's not the start of a trustworthy story." A muscle in her cheek moved. "I took it out of an idiotic hiding place and put it somewhere safer until we could talk like this." "Like what? With a lawyer at your elbow?" She looked for a second, tired. "Yes, with someone who could interpret you. You've always used words like weapons. I wanted armor. I wanted her wishes. That's it." I searched her face for the sister who used to braid my hair and identify clouds, and found only a woman who had learned to treat closeness like leverage. "If the codicil is real, we'll all see it. If it's not—" "It is," she snapped, then softer, "It is." She touched my sleeve. "Let's make this simple. We sell the house, we split the proceeds, we pay the taxes and bills, we skip the scholarship." "No." The word came out before she could dress the sentence in logic. "She wanted it." "She wanted to keep you busy," she said, a cheap shot that still found purchase, "and you always loved having the last word. But this isn't about us." I glanced toward Bennett, who had turned his face toward the wind, polite like a lamppost. "We'll let the court see everything." She watched me a beat longer, then smiled a strange, sad smile. "You never did like short roads, did you?" she murmured. She turned and walked away, her heels clicking time again, her lawyer falling into step. "Don't talk to her without me present," Bennett said softly as he rejoined me, "and no more documents in your house. Originals stay with me or with the court." "They already do," I said. "What happens now?" "Now," he said, "we act like rain. We collect what we need, drop by drop, until the ground changes shape." He set the first drops that afternoon. We requested a certified copy of the allegedly later document Celeste had filed, a codicil, if that's what it was. We asked for the notary information. We asked for the witness names. We asked the clerk to preserve the originals for examination by a document expert. Bennett made a list as neatly as Grandma would have. He wrote on a yellow pad in a bold, comforting hand. "Notary listed on codicil. Name, commission number. Witnesses, names, addresses, relationship. Location of signing. Handwriting comparison. Signature consistency. Notary log, entry for date in question. Any calendar entries with church secretary for notary service. Mobile notary services in area, bank records, checks to any notaries or witnesses, locksmith receipt, fireproof pouch, chain of custody." "Go home and rest," he said, when our list was taped with blue painter's tape to the inside of his office door like a coach's plan. "Then go see the church. Mrs. Karstens will have her notary log. We'll start there." I drove to St. Albans as the light thinned. The parking lot was mostly empty except for the pastor's hatchback and a snowplow with a rust and scoop. Inside, the hall smelled of coffee and hymnals. Mrs. Karsten sat at a folding table with a casserole of macaroni and cheese that she was spooning into small plastic containers. "For the bereavement ministry," she said briskly. "Food is love, but love is also lists." She patted my arm with a dry hand. "You look like your grandmother when she had a task. That's a compliment." "I need your log," I said, and when her eyebrows rose, I added, "the notary one." She set her spoon down and slid a black-bound book out from under her tote. "What are we hunting?" I gave her the will's date. She flipped pages until she got to June. There it was, in her thin cursive, "Eleanor A. Breyer, last will and testament. 2 credible witnesses present. ID verified. Fee waived. Signed at church office. 3:14 p.m. Seal affixed."
Beneath that were the names of the two witnesses, both church ladies who loved order more than dessert, Marjorie Collins and Ruth Pelps. Mrs. Karstens had even drawn a little lighthouse next to Eleanor's entry, a joke between them. "Do you have any entries for a later codicil?" I asked. She flipped forward. "No codicils for Eleanor," she said. "She teased me for using words that sounded like soup. If she'd needed me again, I would have brought the stamp to her house myself, but she never asked." "Do mobile notaries leave logs with you?" I asked. "If someone else notarized something?" "No." She closed the book. "But we talk. Darphne Harrow sometimes does the nursing home signings when I'm with the choir. She's reliable as sunrise. You could call her." She reached into her tote and pulled out a business card. "Darphne Harrow, mobile notary, Cape Ann, commission number 178342. The card had a little lighthouse, too. I held the card and for a second, let the fact that expertise wears a cardigan calm me. "Thank you," I said, "for the lighthouse." She squeezed my hand. "Your grandmother had a sharp tongue for injustice and a soft one for people trying their best. Use both." That night, Harbor Lane was darker than usual. The porch light burned, a halo in the mist. I let myself in and locked the door behind me, then double-checked the back latch, the old brass one that stuck in summer. I made tea even though my hands didn't need caffeine. The kettle sang its thin silver note. The house sounded like memory and winter. I dialed the number on the card. After 4 rings, a warm voice answered, "Darphne Harrow." "Miss Harrow, my name is Rowan Whale. I'm calling about a notarization you may have performed for my grandmother, Eleanor Breyer, late this summer." "Eleanor," she said, her voice instantly fond. "That woman made me keep an extra pen in my bag because she didn't trust anyone who only had one." "What about her?"
That night, the house felt both safer and lonelier with the new lock. I took a mug of tea to the study and sat at the desk where the lighthouse painting watched. I let my eyes wander the spines of the books, not for clues this time, but because titles are a kind of petition to the future. A thin blue notebook caught my eye, out of alphabetical order. I pulled it down. It was a ledger of small things: propane deliveries, plumber visits, dates when the chimney was cleaned. Halfway through, an entry a month after the will: "Sell here, brought soup, told her no to the second draft." Another entry a week later in a sharper hand, as if she'd pressed harder: "If they ask, say I had tea with M at the harbor." My throat went dry. I checked the date against my memory of Celeste's trip. She had indeed come for a weekend. We'd had coffee. She'd told me the winter light made her feel like a better version of herself. I had believed her because it was a beautiful sentence. Had she asked Grandma for a second draft? The word draft lived in my head like paper and ink and pressure. I photographed the entries and sent them to Bennett. His reply came back in minutes. "This is gold. Keep the original safe and bring it to me in the morning. We'll lay a foundation for it as a contemporaneous record." I slept an hour longer than I meant to and woke with a dream still clinging to my shoulder like cobweb. Grandma at the lighthouse, pointing not at the sea, but at the small shop that sold postcards, as if to say, "The proof you need will look like a souvenir." On the day of the hearing, the courthouse lobby was crowded with people carrying pieces of their lives in folders. Bennett met me by the metal detector and handed me a peppermint, like a sacrament. "The judge is fair," he said. "She dislikes theater. She loves receipts." We took our place at counsel table. Across the aisle, Celeste sat with her lawyer, immaculate as if mourning had been pressed just for her. She didn't meet my eyes. I felt, absurdly, a pang for the girl who used to write our names in the fog on the back window of Dad's Volvo. But then the clerk intoned, "Essex Probate and Family Court is now in session," and the room became a place where childhood had no standing. Honorable Margaret Delaney took the bench with the quiet authority of someone who can make rooms behave by entering them. "Good morning," she said, "and then our docket number, and then our names. We are here on a petition for probate and appointment of personal representative, and on objections filed by the decedent's other heir regarding a later instrument." Her gaze moved from me to Celeste and back, as if weighing the shoreline between us. "Appearances, please." Bennett stood,
for the petitioner, Rowan Vale. Elliot Crane for the respondent, Celeste Vale, Celeste Slur said, smooth as lacquer. Very well, Judge Delaney said. I have reviewed the filings. Ms. Newman, do we have the original will and the original alleged codicil present? We do, Your Honor, the clerk said. Good. The judge looked at us like a school teacher whose class was about to learn long division for real. Mr. Bennett, brief opening. Bennett spoke simply. Your Honor, the decedent executed a will in June at her church office in the presence of 2 witnesses and a notary known to her. That will names my client as personal representative and contains reasonable, clear dispositions. After the decedent's passing, the respondent produced a purported codicil dated a month later that radically alters the administration and beneficiaries. We have significant concerns about the authenticity of that codicil. The notary listed has stated under oath she did not perform the notarization and that her stamp was stolen the week before the date in question. Our examiner has identified indicia of tracing in the signature. We will present evidence sufficient to preclude probate of the codicil and to appoint Miss Vale as personal representative. Crane stood. Your Honor, we have a later instrument that reflects the decedent's true intent. The petitioner is attempting to cling to an earlier version because it suits her. We will show that the decedent discussed changes with her physician and with the respondent, that she wished for the respondent to handle affairs due to proximity and competence, and that any irregularities in the notarial act do not vitiate the underlying intent. Very well, the judge said. I will hear witnesses this morning as to the authenticity of the codicil, sufficient to determine whether there is probable cause to proceed with formal probate of that instrument. Mr. Bennett, call your first witness. We called Mrs. Carstairs. She took the stand in her church cardigan and swore to tell the truth with the seriousness of a woman who had taught second graders to line up for 30 years. She confirmed the June will, the witnesses, the notary act at the church, the lighthouse doodle. Crane declined to cross. We called Daphne Harrow. She laid her notary log on the stand like an altar cloth. She testified to the theft of her stamp, the police report, the communication with the state, and the lack of any entry for Eleanor after June, and her presence in Boston on the date in question. Crane tried to undermine by asking whether she might have forgotten an afternoon house call. She raised one eyebrow. My friend's knee was being resurfaced, she said dryly. You don't forget the smell of hospital linens. We called Dr. Imogen Shaw. She explained signatures as music and performance as stutter, and walked the court through pen lifts, pressure, and hesitation. She showed, under the judge's magnifier, the tremor where the codicil signature dragged along a line like a child tracing a river on a map and pretending they had been there. Crane objected to her conclusory statements. The judge allowed her opinions as based on expertise and examination of originals. Crane then called his witness, Dr. Aaron Keene, Eleanor's primary care physician. He was careful and kind-looking, and I felt the little flinch of seeing someone who had prescribed my grandmother cough syrup speak under oath. Did the decedent ever express to you a desire to alter her will? Crane asked. Dr. Keene nodded once. He mentioned during a routine visit in July that she was thinking about revising. She said, and I'm paraphrasing, that she loved both granddaughters but thought one was better suited to administrative tasks. He glanced at me apologetically. She didn't specify which one. Did she express concerns about capacity or confusion? No, she was sharp. Thank you. Crane smiled, turned. And did the decedent appear to understand the nature of a will? Yes, Dr. Keene said. She said, laws are the stories we write when we can't be in the room. He smiled faintly. I wrote that down because it was good. Crane sat satisfied. Bennett stood and kept his cross simple. Doctor, did the decedent tell you that she had executed a new will or codicil? No. Did you ever witness a signature for her? No. Thank you. Crane called one more witness, a neighbor, Gordon Pike, who testified that Celeste had visited in late July and that he had helped carry a box of paperwork into the house. Looked important, he said, proud to be included in the story. They were laughing. Your Honor, Crane said when he sat, people rarely laugh when committing forgery. People laugh for many reasons, Judge Delaney said dryly, including Merv's. She glanced at her clock. I'm going to take a short recess.
She looked at both counsel tables. "When we return, I will review one more piece of evidence that has just been handed to my clerk." She tapped a brown envelope on the bench. My stomach flipped. The handwriting on the front was familiar.
We stood when she left. The room swelled with the soft roar of whispered speculation. Then it leaned toward me. "Did you file anything else?" "No," I whispered, my pulse in my ears. Celeste's face was composed, but her hand had tightened around her pen until her knuckles were cloud white. 10 minutes later, the bailiff called us back to order. Judge Delaney took the bench with the brown envelope open before her. She looked at me, then at Celeste, then down at the paper as if weighing whether opening it would change the gravity in the room. "This envelope," she said, "was received in the clerk's overnight box this morning. It is addressed, 'To be filed with my will if there is trouble,' and bears the decedent's name in what appears to be her hand. The clerk has preliminarily confirmed that the return address matches the decedent's residence and that the postmark is 3 days before the date of death." She paused. "I am going to read it into the record." The room held its breath the way a room does before a wedding or a verdict. She unfolded a single page. It reads, "If there is ever a question about my signatures or about who is telling the truth after I can't, look in the kettle, not the vase." She stopped, eyes lifting for a heartbeat toward me as if to ask if the sentence made sense to anyone in particular. Then she continued, "Rowan knows where the blue paper lives. If that has been disturbed by hands that love me in a way that forgets we are all accountable, ask Mrs. Harrow about her stamp. Ask the church about my lighthouse. If anyone brings you a later document, know that my hands were steady the day I signed the first, and that I would never ask a stranger to give me a different pen for the sake of convenience. Signed, Eleanor." I exhaled and felt something old and tight in my chest loosen, something like a knot tied by a sailor who finally saw land. Crane stood. "Your Honor, may I question the authenticity of that letter?" "You may," the judge said, "but first I have a question." She looked at Celeste. "Ms. Vale, did you place any documents in the kettle?" Celeste's lips parted, a small astonishment that seemed to ask who had told. "No," she said, "I don't know what you mean." "Mr. Bennett, do you have the kettle?" I stood. "Yes, Your Honor," I said, my voice surprising me by being both small and steady. "It's at the house. The police noted it was moved on the night of a break-in. I can bring it." "Do so this afternoon," she said. Then to the clerk, "We'll reconvene at 2:30. In the meantime, arrange for a court officer to accompany Ms. Vale to retrieve the kettle." The gavel didn't fall. This wasn't that kind of court. But the sound of chairs and breath and the shuffle of people unfreezing filled the air like seashells in a tide. At 1:15, I was back at Harbor Lane with a court officer named Ruiz, who had forearms like fence posts and eyes like someone who had seen a lot of people on their worst day and still believed in their best. "You okay?" he asked as we walked up the path. "I will be," I said, "if the kettle has what I think it has." In the kitchen, the kettle sat on the stove where I'd righted it after the break-in. Officer Ruiz lifted it with a courtesy that made me want to cry. He turned it over. The base had a felt ring like the blue vase. He looked at me, I nodded. He peeled the felt back with a penknife. 3 tiny screws. We unscrewed them, the base twisted, a hollow cavity, and inside, tight as secrets, was a roll of blue paper and a small flash drive taped in silver. My throat made a sound that wasn't a word. Ruiz let out a low whistle. "Well, I'll be." He slipped the contents into an evidence bag, sealed it, and wrote the time and his initials. "Chain of custody," he said half to himself, like a liturgy. Back at court, at 2:30, the judge took the bench with the patience of a woman who read for pleasure. The clerk unsealed the bag, Dr. Shaw examined the blue paper under the magnifier, and smiled a tight, pleased smile. "Same paper as the letter to the court, same ink, same hand," she murmured. The judge read, "If you are reading this, it is because the person I feared would confuse love with control has insisted on more paper. I love that person dearly. Love is what made her clever, but cleverness is not a saint.
The will I signed at St. Albans is my wish. If you see a later date, know that my neighbor brought a young man to the house with forms and said it would make things easier. I asked to read. He said, just sign here. I didn't. I told him I had one pen that told the truth and one that told pretty stories. This is the truth pen. Signed, Eleanor. Crane stood. Your Honor, objection to the hearsay. Overruled for the limited purpose of this preliminary determination. You'll have your chance at a full evidentiary hearing. For today, I am tasked with determining whether there is probable cause to believe the codicil is invalid. Between the notary's testimony, the document examiner's preliminary findings, the police report of a stolen stamp, and the decedent's own contemporaneous writings, I am satisfied that the codicil is sufficiently suspect to be set aside pending full hearing. She looked at me. Ms. Vale, I am appointing you as special personal representative with limited authority to secure assets, prevent sale or transfer, and obtain records. No liquidation, no distributions, no major decisions without further order. Understood? Yes, Your Honor. She turned to Celeste. Ms. Vale, you will not list or attempt to sell the Harbor Lane property pending this court's further order. Any existing listings must be withdrawn by close of business today. If you have possession of any estate documents, you will deliver them to the special personal representative or to the court forthwith. Celeste's chin lifted. I don't have any, she said, and in the silk of her voice, I heard a terror I wished I did not recognize. We'll set a full evidentiary hearing on the alleged codicil. In the meantime, counsel will confer and exchange copies of any exhibits they intend to rely on. We will also, given the allegation of a substituted instrument, entertain a request for a search warrant if the special personal representative believes there is probable cause to search for additional documents. She banged her gavel once gently. We're adjourned for today. Outside, the air had the clarity that comes after a storm. Bennett shook my hand as if I had climbed something tall. He said, You did well. We have work ahead, but you did what mattered today. I walked down the steps with the court order in my pocket like a warm stone. At the bottom, Celeste waited, her eyes on me in a way that made the hair on my arms alert. Congratulations, she said, each syllable wrapped in velvet. Executor. Special personal representative, limited authority. She smiled as if I had proven her point. Call it whatever makes you feel safest. She tilted her head. We could still agree. This doesn't have to end with you living in that house alone like a lighthouse keeper telling stories to the fog. It won't end like that. It won't end with me alone.
And I am going to keep this simple, Judge Delaney said, voice steady as a plumb line. Probate court cannot incarcerate, but it can protect its process. Court officers will hold Mr. Harrow in this building until local law enforcement arrives to interview him in connection with possible fraud and burglary. As to the matter before me, the purported codicil is, on the present record, gravely suspect. I set it aside pending any prosecution. I find probable cause that the June instrument is validly executed and expresses the decedent's testamentary intent. I appoint Miss Rowan Vale as personal representative with full authority upon filing bond. Miss Vale, you are to secure the estate, inventory assets, file a sworn accounting within 90 days, and carry out the decedent's directions consistent with Massachusetts law. The gavel's single tap was soft, but it seemed to cross the whole room in one stride. I didn't exhale until Bennett's palm found my shoulder, a warm weight saying, There, we made the wind honest. Celeste didn't move. Her lawyer leaned toward her, speaking low. She nodded in a way I knew. Once, it meant she was about to take the stage. Now, it meant she had stepped onto a different kind of platform entirely. The court officers pivoted toward Daniel Harrow. His posture slumped a degree, as if gravity loved him more all at once. When the officers asked him to accompany them, he smiled at the judge like a man trying to coax a wave back to sea. She did not smile back. We filed out into the hallway where lives broke into sentences. I caught a glimpse of Celeste just before the elevator door slid shut. Her face composed, her knuckles white on the strap of her bag. a flicker of something that looked so much like Little Sister Fear that I had to look away. "Bond," Bennett said briskly once we were outside in air that smelled like new snow. "We'll file it this afternoon. Then we begin the ordinary miracles. Notices, inventories, certified letters. The court has given you a compass and a map. The work, Rowan, is to walk." "I can walk," I said. The words felt like laced boots. By 3, we had filed the bond. By 4, a detective from Salem PD took my statement about the break-in and the kettle, her pen clicking at the places where anger wanted to be an adjective. "We'll interview Mr. Harrow. If he sings, we'll ask him who taught him the tune." That night at Harbor Lane, I turned on every light, not out of fear, but out of the extravagant relief of having found a clear path through a fog. The study smelled like lemon oil and old attention. I opened a fresh legal pad and began my first inventory list. House at 18 Harbor Lane, account at Gloucester Savings, savings bonds in Bennett's lockbox, 2 rings, 1 sapphire, personal effects, 1 stubborn hydrangea bush that refused to die. I wrote like a person stitching a sail. Every noun was a square inch of canvas catching the wind of my grandmother's wishes. At 7, my phone buzzed. Celeste. A text as precise as a pin. "Can we speak alone?" I stared at it long enough to read motives in the pixels. Then I typed, "Tomorrow, 10 a.m., the kitchen. Bring your keys." I slept better than I had in weeks. Outside, the harbor creaked. Inside, the radiators ticked. My body learned again what it was to have a roof you chose. Celeste arrived on time, which in our family was an apology all its own. She wore a camel coat and no makeup. For a moment in the doorway, her face looked like mine looked in the mirror when there was no one to be brave for. I made coffee. "We have peppermint tea if you—" "Coffee is fine." She wrapped her hands around the mug as if it were a question she couldn't answer and then set it down untouched. "You're the executor." "Personal representative." And then, because I no longer wanted to spar with language when a person was trying, added, "Yes." She let out a soft breath. "I'm sorry." The 2 words sat in the air like a fragile bird. Not for everything. I don't know if I'm ready. But for hiding the will, for calling that man, for thinking I could bend paper so the world would be easier. I had prepared speeches. I had prepared fury. I had not prepared for a genuine thing, dropped carefully on my table like good china. "Why?" I asked. "Why any of it?" She looked out the window at the harbor, where gulls drew punctuation over water. "London isn't a romance if you're not rich. My job is a string of parties that look like work and work that looks like parties. The flat is gorgeous because it has to be. Gorgeous is what my clients buy. Behind the photos, the walls are thin. The landlord, he's charming until he isn't. I'm good at what I do, but good costs money. And after Grandma got sick, I had—" She stopped, shook her head. "It doesn't matter. I wanted liquid. I wanted to sell and split and go back and not drown." She laughed once, without joy. "The scholarship made me crazy. It felt like sentimental poverty." "Sentimental generosity," I corrected softly. She winced. "Yes. I know that now." She picked up the mug, put it down again. "I called Daniel because he said he could make it easier. He said families did this all the time. Updated, clarified. He said your job would make you too busy to do this right. He said he knew a notary. He said the word intent, like he owned it." "And when did it not feel like easier anymore?" I asked. "The night I came back and you were holding the fireproof pouch like it was a lung. The sound of the zipper catching. I heard something tear, and it turned out it was me." A tear burned the rim of her eyes, but she blinked them back. "I went to the clerk because I thought if it was formal, it would be clean. I didn't know about the stolen stamp until you did." She looked up, and her voice was so small I could not find all its echoes. "I made a mess. I made it because I felt small and I wanted to feel big. I made it because I was ashamed of drowning. The house held us the way a patient mother holds arguing children, gently, refusing to let go. I set my hands on the table, palms down, the way Grandma did when she was about to pronounce a sentence without anger, but with permanence. I won't be cruel, but I will also not be vague. You have to tell the police everything. You have to sign a sworn affidavit for the court about Daniel. You have to retrieve any emails, messages, drafts. I will. She already told the detective I would cooperate. Elliot, my lawyer, says it's the only road back. And you have to help me do the scholarship, not because you wanted it, but because she did. You will help build the thing you tried to bury. Celeste's mouth twisted. Part grief, part relief, all recognition. Okay, she whispered. I can do that. We spent the rest of the morning not talking about forgiveness. Two women in a kitchen with a legal pad and a pencil and a habit of lists. We made a plan to meet the dean at Cape Ann Community College. We wrote a name for the fund, the Breyer Lighthouse Scholarship, in honor of the woman who drew lighthouses in margins and in lives. We wrote a first-year stipend drawn from the bonds. We wrote criteria Grandma would have liked. Students over 25 who were starting again, with preference to those who worked nights, because people who carried the day on the wrong side of the clock deserve the good pen, she always said. When Celeste left, she pressed her house key into my palm. For now, she said. I'll ask before I come. She paused on the porch. Rowan?
I hate that I needed a judge to teach me how not to be a child. She tried to smile. I'm going to try to be your sister again instead. Try is a verb, I said. It counts. The next 3 weeks were the kind that turn a person into their own assistant. I mailed notices to creditors and potential heirs. I photographed the antiques for the inventory, writing, mahogany dresser, 3 drawers, sticky second. Like the world would end if I forgot the stickiness. I opened an estate account and moved the checking funds under the court's umbrella. I found an envelope in the bread box with $50 and a note in Grandma's hand for unexpected guests. I cried, loudly and without embroidery, for a full minute beside the toaster. And then I wrote, envelope, bread box, tender. Bennett taught me the rhythm of probate: petition, notice, inventory, accounting, distribution. It's like a hymn with verses, he said. You sing the next one when it's time. You don't jump to the chorus. On a Tuesday, the detective called. She said, Harrow talked. He bought Daphne Harrow's stolen stamp from a kid who didn't know what he had. He moonlighted as a family paperwork consultant, unlicensed, fast, and sloppy. He's linked to 3 other estates where paperwork went missing and later documents appeared. Your sister's cooperation filled the gaps. The DA's office will charge him. There may be restitution. He'll likely plead. Thank you, I said. I stood in the study with the phone warm against my cheek and the lighthouse painting watching. Thank you for listening to paper. 2 days later, I sat in the dean's office at the community college with Celeste beside me in a blue dress I'd never seen her wear. Plain, gorgeous only if you pay attention. Dean Morales had the demeanor of a person who had learned how to tell budget numbers like bedtime stories that make people sleep anyway. We laid out the bonds, the expected interest, the intent. We'd like to fund 2 scholarships this first year, I said. One in the fall, one in the spring. $2,000 each. We'll grow it if we can. Dean Morales smiled, but not the fundraising smile. The other one, the real one, that meant a person had just watched a new door appear in a hallway they had been walking for years. She said, We will steward this well. What would you like the selection letter to say? I looked at Celeste. She looked at me. We'll draft it together, she said. And for the first time in weeks, I believed that together didn't mean compromise so much as the geometry of 2 people looking in the same direction. We wrote the letter that night at the kitchen table. Dear student, you may feel like wind when the houses around you look like brick. We promise you are the weather that shapes the shore. Take this light. It is not everything. It is enough for the next step. In the middle of writing, I remembered the note to the audience Eleanor would have nutted me for forgetting and looked up at the camera I had set on the shelf for my YouTube channel, the one where I recorded stories so people who loved long sentences could sit in kitchens far away and feel less alone. I leaned in and said, "This story took us a long time. If you like it, subscribe. Now back to the story." Then I turned back to Celeste, and we kept writing. The evidentiary hearing on the codicil's validity was shorter than the first. Crane arrived without Daniel Harrow and with a face that had learned something about consequence. He did not argue hard. The judge admitted the video from the kettle. She adopted Dr. Shaw's report by reference and made the finding that the codicil was fraudulent and void. The court does not permit grief to become a weapon. She entered the decree admitting the June will to probate, appointed me personal representative without limitation, and set the date for the first accounting. Outside the courthouse, Celeste pushed her hands into her coat pockets, as if to keep them from saying more than her mouth was ready to say. "Thank you for not making me smaller," she said. "You made yourself larger," I replied. "I just held the measuring tape." "What will you do with the house?" she asked. Not argumentative, just curious. "I don't know yet." I looked past her at the line of roof sloping toward the harbor, every shingle like a scale on a gentle whale. I thought I'd want to sell. Today I want to keep it and let the rooms keep being useful. I smiled. "There's a guest room with your name on it, if you text first." She rolled her eyes. "I will text. I will also bring good butter and not the cheap London kind." "Do you want your half of the equity now?" I asked, practical as a ledger. "I can refinance, buy you out." She shook her head. "Not yet. Let's do it slowly. I'm not drowning anymore, and maybe my half can be patient for once." She squeezed my hand, quick and untheatrical. "Go be Executor." I went. Executor turned out to be less glamour and more laundry. I sorted linens and boxed photos for cousins and wrote letters to utility companies that began, "Please transfer service to the estate of Eleanor A. Breyer," which always made me feel like I was escorting a queen between rooms. I donated clothes to the church thrift and kept one cardigan that still smelled like verbena and cinnamon. I sat on the porch with the scholarship papers and watched the harbor do what harbors do: hold, release, hold again. The first scholarship recipient wrote a thank you the way some people write first poems, careful, almost apologetic. Her name was Luz. She was 28, a single mother, working nights at the bakery. She wanted to finish the nursing program she'd started when she was 19, before life multiplied. She almost didn't apply, she wrote, because she thought awards were for the kind of people who don't drop things. Your letter said the weather shapes the shore. I printed her email and taped it inside the ledger with the lighthouse doodle. When I sent her the award letter, I put the sapphire ring on, kissed my fingertip, and told the air, "We did it, Elle." The DA called to say Daniel had pled to forgery and burglary. He named a man in Revere who bought and sold stolen stamps, a small empire of bad ink. Your sister's cooperation was material, the ADA said. Restitution will be ordered. Do you want to speak at sentencing? Yes, I said, surprised by my certainty. Not to conquer, to count. At sentencing, in a room that looked like a cousin of the probate courtroom, except hungrier, I stood at a podium and told the judge what paper means when a person is gone. I told him laws are the stories we write when we cannot be in the room. I told him notaries do quiet, heroic work that deserves the dignity of truth. I told him a kettle can be a vault if someone loves you enough to think in soup pots. I told him forgiveness and consequence are neighbors who share a fence. He listened. He sentenced. He ordered restitution and community service at the community college, shelving books in the library where the scholarship names would be spoken. On my way out, Daphne Harrow stopped me with a hand on my elbow. She said, "You made the room better," and I decided I would let myself be proud in exactly the size of that compliment.
The last thing on my executor list was not on any court form. Decide about the house. I walked every room like I was saying a rosary I didn't know I knew. The study, pen. The kitchen, kettle. The parlor, blue vase. The guest room where I used to sleep, clouds on the wallpaper faded to gentleness. In the attic, a trunk held quilts and a jar of buttons the size of moons. In the basement, the boiler clanged with the authority of an old man telling a story you've heard 100 times and still love. I stood on the porch and called Celeste. "I want to keep it," I said. "I want to buy you out. We'll do it above board, appraisal, bank, closing table where the lawyer has hard candy and a pen that's heavier than you expect." She said, "I'll be there." And I believed her. The closing was in March, on a day when the harbor wore a gray sweater, and the gulls looked like punctuation marks learning to be sentences. The appraiser had done his measured magic. The numbers behaved. I signed papers until my hand cramped. Celeste signed and then leaned back, eyes closed for a second, like someone who had been holding her breath for longer than a person should. We hugged in the parking lot. Not a photo hug, a real one. Spring came. It always does, and you never deserve it, which is why it feels like grace. The hydrangea bush greened. The scholarship letters went out. Luz sent a photo of her in scrubs with a grin that went straight to the bone. Celeste came up on a Friday with a suitcase and stayed 2 nights in the room with the clouds. We made pancakes. She cried in the kitchen because the coffee filters were in the wrong drawer, and then laughed at herself so hard she hiccuped. We started saying "we" in present tense, and meaning it. One afternoon, I sat on the porch with my laptop open to the channel that had become a small, stubborn boat in my life. I uploaded the last chapter of our story, this story, and watched the progress bar creep like a tide. The thumbnail was the house in soft harbor light, the title my grandmother's sentence about laws and stories. Comments began like birds. When the sun went down, I made tea and carried the tray to the study. I set a second cup down out of habit. "For you," I said out loud, "if there are places where the dead are allowed to listen, I want them to have tea." I pulled the kettle off the hook and held it for a moment. The felt had been replaced, the screws reset. I put it back consciously, the way you put back an organ that saved you once and might again. On the desk, I left the ledger open to the page where I had written, months ago, in tired block letters, "She asked me to keep the wind honest." Beneath it, with a softer pen, now that the wind had changed, I wrote, "I did. We did." The next morning, after coffee and a list made of verbs, I sat back down at the desk and hit publish. The progress bar went blue, then full. I leaned into the microphone and for the last time let the camera have the closing it had earned. 2 more great stories are next. Don't miss them. Subscribe and turn on notifications.